Hey everybody, so yesterday we left off page 138, and if you recall when we read, Guy finally got away from the city. He fled into the river and was able to get to somewhere downstream safely and find the railroad tracks he was looking for. He has one final closing thought where we left off. He said, once long ago, he was surprised to learn how certain he suddenly was of a single fact he couldn't prove, that once long ago Clarice had walked here where he was walking now. So that's where we left off. There's no hint that Clarice actually was there, except a vague feeling from Guy that she was, or that it's been any time recently. So that's where we left off. He's now roaming through, hopefully going to find a group of people, as Faber put it, the retired Harvard professors, not necessarily all from Harvard, but people who choose to live outside of the city so that they can safely read books or keep books. Okay, so we're at the bottom of 138. Half an hour later, and moving carefully on the tracks, fully aware of his entire body, his face, his mouth, his eyes stuffed with blackness, his ears stuffed with sound, his legs prickled with burrs and nettles, he saw the fire ahead. The fire was gone, then back again like a winking eye. He stopped, afraid he might blow the fire out with a single breath, but the fire was there, and he approached warily from a long way off. It took the better part of 15 minutes before he drew very close indeed to it, and then he stood looking at it from cover. That small motion, the white and red color, a strange fire, because it meant a different thing to him. It was not burning. It was warming. Dun, dun. So all of a sudden, he's walking down the railroad tracks, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but if you see a fire from a distance, you can't really 100% tell how close that is. You start heading for it, and then you can finally get a beat on how close it might or might not be. So he starts heading for it, and it says the fire was winking at him. The fire's not winking, it's just that it keeps disappearing behind trees because it's in the middle of the woods. So he sees it and then doesn't see it for a second. And then when he gets there, he doesn't go right up to the fire. He's around it. Not around the fire, but far enough away where he can see people doing something. And he says, whoa, what is this? This fire is different. These people are containing the fire, and they're using it not to destroy, but to keep themselves warm. Dun dun. He saw many hands held to its warmth, hands without arms, hidden in darkness. No, these people are not armless maniacs. The reason he says hands without arms is because Guy can't fully see all the way up the arm. He sees their hands being held to the fire, but he can't, because of the lack of light, see their actual arms. So that's what that means. It doesn't mean there are armless people. Okay? Every year someone thinks someone is there with no arms. That's not what's happening. He saw many hands held to its warmth, hands without arms, hidden in darkness. Above the hands, motionless faces that were only moved and tossed and flickered with firelight. He hadn't known fire could look this way. He had never thought in his life that it could give as well as take. Even its smell was different. So this fire is different. It's giving them warmth, and it doesn't smell like kerosene, because every time he makes fire, he always uses kerosene or the flamethrower. So he's always got some accelerant, something to make the fire worse. But in this case, there's no accelerant. They're just burning regular wood, so it smells different. How long he stood there he didn't know, but there was a foolish and yet delicious sense of knowing himself as an animal come from the forest drawn by the fire. He was a thing of brush and liquid eye, of fur and muzzle and hoof. He was a thing of horn and blood that would smell like autumn if you bled it out on the ground. He stood a long, long time, listening to the warm crackle of the flames. There was a silence gathered all about that fire, and the silence was in the men's faces. And time was there, time enough to sit by this rusting track under the trees and look at the world and turn it over with the eyes, as if it were held to the center of the bonfire, like a piece of steel these men were all shaping. It was not only the fire that was different, it was the silence. Montag moved toward this special silence that was concerned with all of the world. And then the voices began, and they were talking, and he could hear nothing of what the voices said, but the sound rose and fell quietly, and the voices were turning the world over and looking at it. The voices knew the land and the trees and the city which lay down the track by the river. The voices talked of everything. There was nothing they could not talk about. He knew from the very cadence and motion and continual stir of curiosity and wonder in them. And then one of the men looked up and saw him for the first or perhaps the 7th time, and a voice called out to Montag, "All right, you can come out now." Montag stepped back into the shadows. "It's all right," the voice said. "You're welcome here." Montag walked slowly towards the fire and the 5 old men sitting there, dressed in dark blue denim pants and jackets and dark blue shirts. He did not know what to say to them. "Sit down," said the man who seemed to be the leader of the small group. "Have some coffee?" He watched the dark, steaming mixture pour into a collapsible tin cup, which was handed to him straight off. He sipped it gingerly and felt them looking at him with curiosity. His lips were scalded, but that was good. The faces around him were bearded, but the beards were clean, neat, and their hands were clean. They stood up as if to welcome a guest, and now they sat down again. Montag sipped. "Thanks," he said. "Thanks very much." "You're welcome, Montag. My name's Granger." He held out a small bottle of colorless fluid. "Here, drink this too. It'll change the chemical index of your perspiration. Half an hour from now you'll smell like 2 other people. With the hound after you, the best thing is bottoms up." Montag drank the bitter fluid. "You'll stink like a bobcat. That's all right," said Granger. "You know my name," said Montag. Yeah, they knew his name, and they knew the hound is after him. Interesting how they know that. Granger nodded to a portable battery TV set by the fire. "Oh, we've watched the chase. Figured you'd wind up south along the river here. When we heard you plunging around out in the forest like a drunken elk, we didn't hide as we usually do. We figured you were in the river when the helicopter cameras swung back in over the city. Something funny there, though. Chase is still running. Other way now." "The other way?" said Montag. "Yeah, let's have a look." Granger snapped the portable TV viewer on. The picture was a nightmare, condensed, easily passed from hand to hand in the forest, all whirring color and flight. A voice cried, "The chase continues north in the city. Police helicopters are converging on Avenue 87 in Elm Grove Park." Granger nodded. "They're faking. You threw 'em off at the river, but they can't admit it. They know they can hold their audience only so long. That's how they've got to have the show's got to have a snap ending quick. If they started searching the whole damn river, it might take all night. So they're sniffing for a scapegoat to end things with a bang. You watch, they'll catch Montag in the next 5 minutes." "But how?" asked Montag. "Just watch." The camera, hovering in the belly of a helicopter, now swung down at an empty street. So he stumbles across these guys. They happen to have a battery TV set, so they were expecting, perhaps, not expecting, but perhaps thinking maybe that he would be there. And when they hear somebody plunging around in the forest, they don't all run and hide like they normally would. And in fact, they now are watching on the TV set as the chase of Montag continues. The camera, hovering in the belly of the helicopter, now swung down at an empty street. "You see that?" whispered Granger. "That'll be you. Right up there at the end of that street is our victim. See how our camera's coming in, building the scene, suspense, long shot. Right now, some poor fellow's out for a walk, a rarity, an odd one. Don't think the police don't know the habits of weird ducks like that, men who walk in the mornings just for the hell of it, or for reasons of insomnia. Anyway, police have had him charted for months, years. You never know when that sort of information might be handy, and today, it turns out it's very usable indeed. It saves face. Oh, God, look there." The men at the fire bent forward. On the screen, a man turned a corner. The mechanical hound rushed forward into the viewer suddenly. The helicopter lights shot down a dozen brilliant pillars that built a cage all around the man. Not an actual cage. So they shoot down. Imagine a guy's just walking along, and then poof, all these spotlights shine down on him, and it's like a cage of lights all around him. He's like, "Where do I go? What's happening?" This guy has no idea what's going on. A voice on the radio, a voice cried, "There's Montag. The search is done." The innocent man stood there bewildered, a cigarette burning in his hand. He stared at the hound, not knowing what it was. He probably never knew. He glanced up at the sky and the wailing sirens. The camera rushed down. The hound leapt up into the air with a rhythm and sense of timing that was incredibly beautiful. Its needle shot out. It was suspended for a moment in their gaze, as if to give the vast audience time to appreciate everything. The raw look of the victim's face, the empty street, the steel animal like a bullet nosing in on a target. "Montag, don't move," said a voice from the sky. The camera fell upon the victim even as did the hound. Both reached him simultaneously. The victim was seized by the hound and camera in a great spidering, clenching grip. He screamed. He screamed. He screamed. Blackout. Silence. Darkness. Montag cried out in silence and turned away. Silence. And then, after a time of the men sitting around the fire, their faces expressionless, an announcer on the dark screen said, "The search is over. Montag is dead. A crime against society has been avenged." Darkness. "We now take you to the sky room of the Hotel Lux for an hour of Just Before Dawn, a program Granger turned it off. They didn't even show the man's face in focus. Did you notice? Why, even your best friends couldn't have told if that was you. They scrambled it just enough to let the imagination take over. Hell, he whispered. Hell. So what happened? Some guy is just randomly out taking a walk, and the cops need a scapegoat. They need somebody to catch and blame and call Montag, and they do. So they shine the lights down on him. The hound comes out, kills him, and Montag feels terrible. He's watching this whole thing unfold, and he's like, that's my fault. That guy died because of me. And he didn't have to die, but now he's dead. Montag said nothing, but now, looking back, he sat with his eyes fixed to the black screen, trembling. Granger touched Montag's arm. Welcome back from the dead. Montag nodded. Granger went on. So he says welcome back from the dead because he's actually still alive, and so he's the first one to say hello to him since he's been dead. But Montag is back alive. Granger touched Montag's arm. Welcome back from the dead. Montag nodded. Granger went on. Well, you might as well know all of us. This here is Fred Clement, former occupant of the Thomas Hardy Chair at Cambridge in the years before it became an atomic engineering school. This other gentleman is Dr. Simmons from UCLA, a specialist in the Ortega y Gasset. Professor West here did quite a bit for ethics in ancient study now for Columbia University some years ago. And Reverend Pat over here gave a few lectures 30 years ago and lost his flock between one Sunday and the next for his views. He's been bumming with us for some time now. Myself, I wrote a book called The Fingers in the Glove, the proper relationship between the individual and society. And here I am. Welcome, Montag. So this guy, Granger, he's the leader of their group. I call them Granger's Rangers. You don't have to call them that. Granger's Rangers. And there's 5 of them. You don't have to know all of them. Just Granger is good enough. And he goes around the group and introduces everybody to Montag. They are all very highly educated people. They're mostly professors. They're pretty much all professors and then a reverend. So they're all well-educated, well-read people. So Montag's like, one of these things just doesn't belong here. Montag feels like, what? I don't fit in with you guys. Okay. Where did I leave off? There it is. Okay. I don't belong with you, said Montag at last slowly. I've been an idiot all the way. Oh, we're used to that. We all made the right kind of mistakes, or we wouldn't be here. When we were separate individuals, all we had was our rage. Well, I struck a fireman when he came to burn my library years ago. I've been on the run ever since. Do you want to join us, Montag? Yes. Well, what have you to offer? Nothing. I thought I had part of the book of Ecclesiastes, maybe a little bit of Revelation, but I haven't even that now. Those are also books from the Bible. So apparently Montag was trying to read other books of the Bible while he had it. Ecclesiastes, Revelation. But he's like, I don't remember any of it. Oh, the book of Ecclesiastes, said Granger. That would be fine. Where was it? Here. Montag touched his head. Ah, smiled Granger. He nodded. What's wrong? Isn't that all right? Said Montag. That's better than all right. It's perfect. Granger turned to the Reverend. Do we have a book of Ecclesiastes? One, a man named Harris, Youngstown. Yep. Montag? Granger took Montag's shoulders firmly. Walk carefully and guard your health. If anything should happen to Harris in Youngstown, you are the book of Ecclesiastes. Ha! See how important you've become in the last minute? But I've forgotten all of it. No, nothing's ever lost. We have ways to shake down your clinkers for you. But I've tried to remember. Oh, don't try. It'll come when we need it. So he says, if you've even read the book once, we have ways of getting it out of your brain. If your brain read the book once, it's in there somewhere, and we have a way of getting it out of there. So you have to take good care of yourself, because that book, if this other guy who has that book in his head dies, you become the book of Ecclesiastes, which is a book from the Bible. Don't try. It'll come when we need it. You see, all of us have photographic memories, but we spend a lifetime learning how to block off the things that are really in there. Simmons here has worked on it for 20 years now, and we've got the method down to where we can recall anything that you've read, even once. Would you like someday, Montag, to read Plato's Republic? Of course. I am Plato's Republic. Plato's a famous Greek philosopher. His book called The Republic is a classic. Would you like to read Marcus Aurelius? Mr. Simmons here is Marcus. How do you do? Said Mr. Simmons. Hello, said Montag. And I want you to meet Jonathan Swift, the author of that evil political book, Gulliver's Travels. And this other fellow here is Charles Darwin, and this one is Schopenhauer, and this one is Einstein, and this one here at my elbow is Mr. Albert Schweitzer, a very kind philosopher indeed. Here we all are, Montag. Aristophanes and Mahatma Gandhi and Gautama Buddha and Confucius and Thomas Love Peacock and Thomas Jefferson and Mr. Lincoln, if you please. We are also Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Everyone laughed quietly. It can't be, said Montag. But it is, replied Granger, smiling. We're book burners, too. We read the books and burnt them, afraid they'd be found. Microfilming didn't pay off. We were always traveling, and we didn't want to bury the film and have to come back later. Okay, time out. So these guys, they read the books one time, and this one of them has a way of getting it out of your brain. So that's how they memorize the books. They just have to read them one time, and they now have them memorized. So he says, we didn't want, microfilming didn't pay off. Okay, so microfilming, I got to explain that real quick. Back in the day, Mrs. Mudge, you probably remember this. Before this internet thing that you guys have now, before the internet, if you wanted to do research, there was a machine that you could use. You would go to the library, and it looked like you were sitting in the cockpit of a helicopter. So you would sit down in this chair, and there's this big giant screen and a pair of goggles, and you would put your eyes into the goggles, and there was this lever on the side, and what you would do was you could scroll through newspapers. The newspapers were all photographed and put on microfilm, so the film, an entire roll of film, was very, very tiny, and they would store them all in the machine, and they would call it the microfiche. That was the name of the machine, the microfiche. And you'd sit there and you could choose the newspaper you wanted and the date, and you could read the news for the day from 10, 20 years ago, whatever you wanted. So that was like the internet before the internet. And you would put your eyeballs up to the thing, and you'd use this handle on the side, you'd be turning it so it would scroll through all the pictures, and you could read the news from the day. When I was before high school, because by high school we started having the internet, but it's probably like 6th or 7th grade, we had to write like a research paper, and the topic I chose was, some of your parents might remember this, the tire fire in Catskill. If you don't remember, it was 1989. I was a little kid. I was out in my backyard swimming in my where I lived in Catskill, my mom's pool, and all of a sudden I just see these pillars of black smoke just coming up over the woods over here, and I'm like, what is that? And every siren in town is going off, and it turns out, the next day in the newspapers, we read all about it. It was a tire fire. There used to be, back behind where Lowe's was, there was a garage, and they would just throw all their tires out into the woods, pile them all up, and they had big giant pile of tires, and it caught on fire, and all the tires burned. Well, I decided that for my research paper, this is now probably, 6 or 7 years later, I was going to write about the tire fire. So I had to go sit in the microfiche machine and go looking for it was like July of 1989, and I went through all the Daily Mails. That was the newspaper in Catskill, the Catskill Daily Mail, which still exists, but I don't know. I think might be called the Hudson Valley something. But anyway, I went through all the microfiche and found the articles about the tire fire and read all about it and wrote my research paper on it. And that was how you did research back then. You had to kind of know the date you were looking for. You couldn't just, there's no search engine. There's nothing you could type in. It was crazy. Anyway, that's what they're talking about with this microfilm. These tiny, you could theoretically take pictures of every page of all the books and store them on this tiny film and read them later. But that's hard because you have to leave the film somewhere, and where are you going to leave it? You're going to bury it. People could find it. So they said better off not doing that. We'll just use this method that Simmons has developed to memorize the books. Okay. Microfilming didn't pay off. We were always traveling, and we didn't want to bury the film and come back later. Always a chance of discovery. Better to keep it in the old heads where no one can see or suspect it. We are all bits and pieces of history and literature and international law, Byron, Tom Paine, Machiavelli, or Christ himself. It's all here, and the hour's late, and the war's begun, and we are out here, and the city is there, all wrapped up in its own coat of 1,000 colors. So, what do you think, Montag? I think I was blind, trying to go at things my own way, planting books in firemen's houses and sending in alarms. Well, you did what you had to do. Carried out on a national scale, it might have worked beautifully. But our way is simpler, and we think better. All we want to do is keep the knowledge we think we'll need intact and safe. We're not out to incite or anger anyone, for if we're destroyed, the knowledge is dead, perhaps for good. No, we're model citizens in our own special way. We walk the old tracks, we lie in the hills at night, and the city people let us be. We're stopped and searched occasionally, but there's nothing on us to incriminate us. The organization is flexible, very loose and fragmentary. Some of us have had plastic surgery on our faces and fingerprints. Right now we have a horrible job. We're waiting for the war to begin and, as quickly end. It's not pleasant, but then we're not the ones in control. We're the odd minority crying in the wilderness. When the war's over, perhaps we can be of some use in this world. All right, so he says, here's the deal. Here's what we're doing. We're out here. We're not trying to start any revolution like you and Faber were thinking about doing. He doesn't even know Faber, but I'm just saying. He's saying we're not trying to start any. Our only goal is to keep the books safe in our heads. That's it. Just survive. That's our goal. Because one day there'll be a chance for us to be able to once again have books and literature and thinking, and we want to regurgitate the books and bring them back. And if they're all burned, that would be very difficult to do. So we keep them in our heads and we stay safe. The cops, every once in a while, a cop might find us and search us, but we don't have anything illegal on us, no books. So there's no way for them to do anything about it. So we're just waiting. He says we're waiting for the war to begin and as quickly end. It's not pleasant, but we're not in control. He said he's thinking like Faber was thinking. Maybe this war will wake people up, and then maybe they'll be willing to listen again. When the war is over, perhaps we can be of some use in this world. But do you really think they'll listen then? Asked Montag. Well, if not, we'll just have to wait. We'll pass the books on to our children by word of mouth and let our children wait in turn on the other people. A lot will be lost that way, of course, but you can't make people listen. They have to come round in their own time, wondering what happened and why the world blew up under them. It can't last. Well, how many of you are there? Asked Montag. Oh, thousands on the roads and abandoned rail tracks tonight. Bums on the outside, libraries on the inside. It wasn't planned at first. Each man had a book he wanted to remember and did. Well, then, over a period of 20 years or so, we met each other, traveling, and we got a loose network together and set out a plan. The most important single thing we had to pound into ourselves is that we were not important. We mustn't be pedants. We were not to feel superior to anyone else in the world. A pedant is like a pouting child, someone who thinks they've gotten the raw deal. So he's like, we can't be angry that we're stuck out here roaming around in the wilderness. We have to just remember that we're not important. We just have to keep the books alive. That's our goal. The most important single thing we had to pound into ourselves is that we were not important. We mustn't be pedants. We were not to feel superior to anyone else in the world. We're nothing more than dust jackets for books of no significance otherwise. Some of us live in small towns. Chapter 1 of Thoreau's Walden lives in Green River. Chapter 2 lives in Willow Farm, Maine. Why, there's one town in Maryland with only 27 people in it. No bomb will ever touch that town. In the town is the complete essays of a man named Bertrand Russell. Pick up that town almost and flip the pages, so many pages to a person. And when the war's over, someday, some year, those books can be rewritten again. The people will be called in one by one to recite what they know, and we'll set it all up in type until another dark age when we might have to do the whole damn thing over again. But that's the wonderful thing about man. He never gets so discouraged or disgusted that he gives up doing it all over again, because he knows very well it's important and worth the doing. Kind of makes me think of that part in the poem that we read, if you were here the day we read the poem, where the rocks are being thrown forward and then pulled backwards. He's like, yep, this is our goal right now. We're in this part of the stage, and then hopefully we'll get the books reprinted, and then some hundreds of years from now, somebody else will come along and think we don't need books, and the whole thing will go over again, and we'll start again. It's the ebb and flow of human misery, as they said in the poem. Okay. Well, what do we do tonight? Asked Montag. Tonight? We wait, said Granger, and move downstream a little ways, just in case. He began throwing dust and dirt in the fire. The other men helped, and Montag helped. And there in the wilderness, the men all moved their hands, putting out the fire together. Dun dun! Wait a second, what is that about? Do you get it? For the first time, Montag's actually putting a fire out. He's a fireman, and this is the first time he's put a fire out. They're all throwing dirt on the campfire, and finally, Montag's a fireman. He's finally put out a fire. Oh my, how ironic. Think about it, ironic. Literary elements, note packet. Okay, so we're going to pause reading there for today. There's only 10 pages left. So we'll pick up tomorrow with the reading. Mrs. Mudge has some work for you to do. So that's it for today for me. See y'all tomorrow.